The meeting is sound Ginger and
Fat loss seminar. This is number 3 of the catalogue. So tonight we're going to focus on initially nutrient timing for fat loss. The first DVD of the catalogue was just the enigma of fat loss as an adjunct. Second to that was fructose and fat loss, and tonight we'll do nutrient timing and fat loss. And then we'll obviously lead into post consultation and discussion of any area that anyone's got any issues or concerns with. Nutrient timing for fat loss. And once again, I have to wholeheartedly stimulate. It revolves around this, not health, not well-being, not performance, fat loss, subtly different. We go back to the macronutrients or the substrates, things that we consume that will give us energy. Carbohydrate 1 gram equates to 17 kilojoules. It supplies us energy. We'll look at our protein. Equates to the same. 1 gram of protein will also supply us with 17 kilojoules of energy. Lipid or fat? One gram will equate to 37 kilojoules of energy. And then the other one that supplies energy that we won't talk about in regards to affecting nutrient timing, because will be alcohol. The reason we won't discuss it, or I'd be hoping that you're not consuming alcohol while you're on a treadmill. Could be dangerous. 37 kilojoules, as we said, so it's more than double the energy content, fat, of protein and carbohydrate. So you've got a basic premise there of when you consume carbohydrate being any plant-based foods, proteins being any animal-based, dairy-based foods, and lipid and fat, what can be a synergy of an animal fat, or it can also be a plant fat, sunflower, safflower, soybean oil, etc., peanut oil. Once we consume these energy sources, if we're looking for a fat loss, we need to know what and where these things go in our body. And what, therefore, when we undertake exercise out there, what are the fuel sources that we use to undertake that exercise? So if we go and look at exercise, we'll look at, first and foremost, some aerobic exercise. So, once again, that aerobic exercise could be the synergy of rowing, it could be running, swimming, skipping, walking, any of those, riding. Being aerobic in nature per se, it would mean that the predominant fuel source we use in aerobic exercise is glucose, also known as carbohydrate. What plays an important factor here is the intensity that we undertake exercise. So the harder we work in regards to our heart output, the more glucose that we would use. So again, the higher the intensity of exercise equates to higher glucose use.
and that's good.
Well, Nancy, good question. It really is up to what your goal is. So if we're looking at fat loss, yes, it is a good thing. Because where we store glucose or carbohydrate in our bodies are in the liver. And secondly, in the muscle cells. So if we're using a lot of glucose, that means that our stores of glucose here which would be inside the liver and inside the muscles have to be depleted. So we go from, here's our petrol tank, we go from a full tank of fuel to a low tank of fuel. If we work hard, obviously we burn a lot of glucose. But the problem below with that is that when we burn all this glucose, that's great, but we're not tapping into fat as a fuel source. Remember, so you're using all of this as an energy source and all of this as an energy source, but still the energy source that most people are really wanting to use are their love handles or wherever they're storing fats on their butt or wherever. So ultimately, the more aerobic activity you do, or running, skipping, walking, riding, and so on, the fuels that you're using, being glucose, aka carbohydrate, will allow your tank to come down, down, down. But it doesn't mean that for most people, unfortunately, they don't operate at an intensity or for a duration that's even anywhere near long enough to get far down the petrol tank.
Not using enough up.
Not using enough up, and second to that, they're not getting the opportunity to use fat as a fuel source either. So it's a double whammy for most. Whereas when we look at resistance training, so the weight training, the panel beater, we'll go and have a look at how that works. We'll come back to this, by the way.
Can I just, before you do go?
Yes.
Because you said they're not using enough up of the tank. Now that's, say, aerobic time.
Yes.
What long a period, say, for example, for me, I go for 15 minutes on the thing to warm up. Now what I've started doing is doing 5 minutes on low and then 5 minutes on medium and 5 minutes before I go on the machine. And in that time, when I go on the machine, so I've got 2 blocks of 5 minutes on the bike.
Yes.
And I go for 5 minutes and I've been trying to increase my RPM. Now, so that's only 10 minutes, so what does I say, 15 plus 16? So would that be enough? Or just
When I say no so abruptly, I'll pull myself back. Of course it's good what you're doing, you know. Exercise is fantastic for health and well-being and all that sort of jazz. But it's going to, before you even get the chance to tap into fat as a predominant fuel source, you're looking at cardiovascularly a minimum, and this is a minimum where you start to get the cusp rise, where you start to tap into fat as the predominant fuel source, is anywhere between 90 minutes and 120 minutes of consistent exercise before you get the transfer effect from being glucose driven to fat driven. So you've got to, yeah.
In the early days, before my blood pressure started going up the second time and then put me on the second tablet, I used to do 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, and I was jogging.
Yes. Yeah.
Then I was doing 5 minutes on the cross country and then 5 to 10 minutes. But overall, I was doing, say, half an hour, 35 minutes. I thought for my age I was pushing it hard. The thing is, that's interesting you saying that I'm still not tapping in enough really to bring more juice out of the tank.
Yeah, well, and the unfortunate aspect with all the science and the statistics that support all of this is that most people don't have hours and hours in their day to spend exercising. So it really comes down to, as we've discussed in previous episodes of this, it is so important that you get your eating strategies right, because it's not about this. If it was all about exercise, well then no one would get anywhere, because they haven't got the time, they haven't got the capabilities to meet the needs of the human organism. So if you get your eating strategies right and controlling the hormones that affect weight gain and weight loss, fat loss, well then you're going to be in a better place. But so we talk about aerobic activity being a predominant user of glucose, but in saying that, there's the secondary fuel source, second fuel, is going to be a percent of fat. Now, no scientist in their right mind will even contemplate coming up with a number to support how much percentages of. There's statistics out there that are old school that will say if you work at 65% of your maximum heart rate, well, you're going to be at a higher fat burning capacity. Exactly, and you hit the nail on the head, Nancy. The reality is that they've got general protocols to follow and that would suggest that the lower the intensity of exercise you work at, so if you just stroll like this, it's nearly 100% fat that you're using, very little glucose. But the reality is it's such a small amount of fat. So if I was to walk like this for half an hour, I might burn 40 calories. You know, yeah. So therefore, 40 calories, 4 nines, you know, maybe 4 grams of fat. You know, so you know that's roughly working out about 36 calories at 4 grams. So it's not therefore effective. But when is that intensity effective? That intensity is effective, very effective, when someone is novice to exercise, so they haven't exercised previously. They're going through a rehabilitation process. They're heavily medicated. So, and you're trying to form a rapport with an individual to know who they are, what they can perform. But the longer you're exercising, the fitter you become, the harder you should push yourself. The reason being, the harder you push yourself, yes, unfortunately, the percentage of fat decreases that you burn, the percentage of carbohydrate you use increases, so therefore a lot of people, well, that's no good because I'm burning more sugar than fat. But ultimately you're spending a lot more energy here. So the goal is to get as much of this energy as possible as you can out of there, so you can get to this as a fuel source. Okay, so that is where it's really important. So it's almost like...
really, you've got to get to the bottom of the tank, because at the bottom of the tank is that bit area there.
You get to Pandora's box. Yeah, you'll get to play with this fuel source, and where the body will start to request that. It's called the glucose-alanine cycle, and alanine is an amino acid, a specific amino acid. So the body breaks down muscle tissue to get sugar, and the specific amino acid that's required to do that is an amino acid called alanine. This is what we've stated in previous CD, that you don't need a drop of carbohydrate to survive for that specific reason. There is a specific process that takes place in the liver where alanine, the amino acid, is converted to glucose, and that's a specific process that will take place over and over and over again. You know, the problem you lie that it's a slow process. You know, you can survive, you will survive without it, but that is the rules of thumb in regards to aerobic exercise and the nutrients that are used to supply the energy outcomes. Okay?
You really just got to keep at that and get it bigger and bigger. Like, as I say, I'm doing 5 minutes. I'm increasing my RPM, so I have increased it. But the next thing I do, perhaps, is not increasing any more RPM, but try and increase the length of time.
Or better still, we'll go to the second phase, and this is where it gets even better.
What's that?
Okay, so we can. This is the predominant fuels we use in aerobic exercise, but it becomes a lot easier. How we get that tank down empty quicker? Resistance training, panel beating, Volkswagen Beetle to Porsche. Nancy, we just talked about the fuel tank. Here's our fuel gauge. It's full, it's empty. As you said so correctly, the goal is to get this to here. So if we've got that to there, the body, and you still undertaking exercise, your body's going to say, holy cow, this woman's still going, she wants more fuel. What are we going to use? Well, there's 2 fuel sources that we still haven't tapped into. So we've got muscle, we don't want to use that, but we've also got fat, and it's got plenty of energy. We want to use that, correct? Okay, so this is how it works. If we go to the panel beater before we do aerobic exercise, so the only fuel you use in the resistance training room, the weight training, is glucose. No fats, no protein, pure glucose is used in weight training. So guess what?
In the body.
In the body. So your muscles, remember we said muscles and liver. store glucose. You weight train, you train hard, you push yourself as hard as you can. All of a sudden, the amount of sugars that you've got go boom, because you've got nothing left in the tank. Then you say, I'm going to the panel, to the aerobics, to do riding, swimming, rowing, cross trainer. Well, the body goes, oh, dilemma, conundrum, what do I do now? Oh, she's still going. Well, hello sailor, here we go. We are able to now use this as a fuel. So this has got nothing to do with intensity of exercise, then, has it, in regards to your aerobic activity? You don't have to work harder for a 90-minute plus window to get to this fat. You've enabled your body to do it for you because you've been using glucose as a fuel store here. The petrol tank's expired. There's nothing left in the petrol tank. So the body will go, okay, secondary energy source, fat, now we're using it. Because there's no glucose to prevent us from using fat as a fuel source. So then every step you take on the rower, every stroke on the rower, every step on the treadmill, every arm action, leg action on the cross trainer is coming from here. Because there's nothing there. So therefore, ultimately, you're increasing your ability to be an efficient fat burner twofold.
And that muscle thing, you were saying, that would be when you sometimes, I've seen quite briefly in, I think it was in the Olympics, the man just collapsed and really, and for I don't know how many years afterwards, do the muscles start eating themselves or do something? He used up everything that was in it, which is more or less you were saying then, there's nothing else left, but the muscle, and he literally collapsed and for some number of years he was quite dead.
Yeah, and that's called, that's
the sort of thing though.
No, it's not, we can't compare what we're going to talk. It's called exertional rhabdomyolysis. That's what you're talking about there. And that's where the body starts to secrete a horrible myoglobin, a specific blood protein that binds in the liver. Well, it's just an excessive exercise outcome, and it's a specific byproduct of that. So, extremist athletes, it's not the same, but I can understand where you're coming from. If you were to work too hard, that you might get into this as a fuel source. Thankfully, the machine, us as an individual, has set parameters of how it functions. It is very, very, very rarely that you get to use muscle as a fuel source. The only reason that would happen is where these crazy eating strategies would allow you to have to start to use this as a fuel because, one, you're not eating enough carbohydrate, two, you're not eating no fat, because this is where a lot of people go wrong too. They cut all their carbohydrates out, they don't ingest any lipid or fat as a fuel, so the body says, well, there's nothing else, what am I going to do? So I better start to break this down, because remember we said, if we break this down, we've got the chance of making glucose because of that amino acid called alanine.
Now when you said eating fat, you don't mean literally eating the fat that's around the meat and things like that.
No.
It's consuming
avocado, obviously almonds, good fats, your omega-3 and 6, your poly and monounsaturated fats, correct?
And the extra virgin.
Extra virgin, flaxseed oil or your linseed oil, all the evening primrose, all the things that your body is going
That's
to
the
use.
only fat really you should be putting in.
Correct, because again the body uses those specific building blocks to make things. It doesn't just go to a fat cell and make this chubby happier because you're making, ad hoc deposit into there. The last thing you want to be doing is eating excess amounts of saturated fats that we don't use to make anything in the body except make this guy happy. So there's no benefit at all to us. Outside of, I refrain and I retract that comment because for many people there is a benefit, and that's psychological happiness. If you eat a donut, if you eat a croissant or something, a lot of people go, oh, yum, and there's definitely a place and time for that. And Rob and I were talking about that previous to the event starting, is that, you should not be looking at eliminating any food from your diet unless you've got a specific goal you want to achieve and you are willing to sacrifice things. So we're talking about fat loss here again. And remember how hard we said fat loss is. And by affecting the events that take place here and the order of fuels that we use, you will ultimately inhibit 100% the ability to use fat as a fuel.
Craig, for resistance training, invented your tank.
Yes, yes.
So when you train resistance training, does that then go into the fat cell?
Yes, through that gluconeogenesis. So it's not going to, this is the last, because it's still working contractily.
Yeah.
So you're using that as a fuel. So once again, you will tap into a lipid content as a fuel source, so which is a beauty. I suppose realistically though, most people have enough carbohydrates stored in liver and muscle to prevent us from getting in there in resistance-based training. And secondly to that, what you would notice, Rob, is that once you have depleted your glycogen stores completely, that your intensity in that place out there would be horrendous. You know, you'd be trying to contract and squeeze muscle. What the hell's going on? I've got nothing, you know, I've got the weight wrong. You know that because the fuel isn't there, like the glucose isn't there on tap, the body's got to go through that process of converting a fat to glucose, and that takes time.
So really, you do need to do resistance training followed by cardio.
If you want fat loss, yeah, that's undebatable now. That was initially, let's go back as little as 5 years ago, that was still very much a debate in the fitness industry about what was the right parameters to do. For ultimate fat loss, and again, that's where we're going, ultimate fat loss, undebatable, it's now theorised that this is the case. Resistance-based training before aerobic activity for fat loss. But then it comes back to other people that say, oh, I just can't, you know, after I've done my weight training, I've got nothing left in the tank. So ultimately, they will go and do the other format. It doesn't lead to the best outcome, and they're not operating at their optimal potential. But, of course, they're still going to get an outcome. It'll just be reduced subtly.
When I finished, you know, I said I start off in 15 minutes, I start and working up. Actually, I go a little bit higher. Then I jumped to 6. Actually, today I went 6.5.
Well done.
5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been a little less than 5. Because don't forget, this was supposed to be my warm-up thing before. Then I dropped it down to say 5, the last 5 to 7 minutes. Then I started on it. Now, when I finished, I told Tony that when I go back to cool down, supposedly, I started today at 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 5. Then I came down to 5, another 5, and then I did the last on about 3.5 to 3.7. And so I had done, after that workout with the machines, I had done a little bit. I know it's not a lot, but I had done, say, 6.5 and 5.
Yeah, more power to you, you know, like, definitely. Remember, it's about, you will have the information presented to you, and then it's a matter of what you do with it. So, you know, I can convey this message to, like a gentleman, I'll use as an example, is a gentleman called Mark Dilfors, who's a pro boxer that I work heavily with. You know, every week I do his skin folds, every week we change his training outcomes. That guy would eat a baby poo sandwich if I told him to. He is that dedicated to his outcome. Everything I say he does, and he gets himself in amazing shape. But that is the mentality that an individual needs to get to where they want. They've got a specific fat loss goal. It is that hard. He will be tempted every day by his girlfriend and family, etc. Come on, you know, having something, come on, one mouthful of ice cream is not going to hurt you. And a lot of people will you know, give into that. And by all means, everyone's got the right to do that. But that does affect your outcome. And that's why Mark will get to 5 or 6% body fat and other people don't. It's that simple.
It just stops the smoothness of the pathway by eating.
Insulin becomes secreted. Insulin is that hormone that inhibits 100% fat loss. You know, it is that critical.
The wrong balance, sort of.
Yeah, quite simply. Yeah, you know, you're trying to drive, you know, a right-hand vehicle in the left-hand side of the car. It just doesn't work properly. So But yet, I can stand here till I'm blue in the face and tell 1,000 people the same information. And if you're lucky to get 3 or 4 that use it, they're the ones that people will comment all the time. Geez, they look good. What are they doing? What are they? Nothing different to what you've been told you could do. But it's about them taking ownership of their goal. That's all it comes down to. Secondly to that, there are individuals that suffer with other ailments, medical ailments, underactive thyroid, a sensitivity to, like what we call glucose sensitivity and metabolic syndromes. So then it becomes a little different. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is another one that's really nasty for women and weight loss. So there's a lot of things that, as a nutritionist, you have to be aware of. But again, I'm just painting a picture of, in theory, Joe and Betty bag of donuts, the layman comes to me, they're carrying a little more weight than they should, they've asked or requested that we give them some advice and some assistance. This is the same information I give them as I give you. Nothing will change. The thing, as we've seen here, is that the fuels that you use in both forms of activity, resistance-based training is glucose, and in aerobic-based training is glucose plus a very small percentile of fat. So we know that predominantly you're burning sugar, either way in exercise. It takes a lot of hard work to burn fat, and the best place to be using fat as a fuel source, as I've said over and over again, is not here. You don't burn very much fat here. Yet 99% of people come through the door and say, I want fat loss, I want weight loss. Well, guess what? As I keep saying, you have to eat right to get fat burning. It's not about, a 4K walk every day. It's not about 1,000 bench presses. It's not. It's about getting it eating right in synergy with being able to get rid of as much of this as you can, so you can get to our friend.
Not putting the right fuel in your petrol tank in the car. Some cars don't like certain types of petrol, and they just won't run.
Yeah, like that. You try and put, leaded fuel in an unleaded car. It's just going to cough and splutter, isn't it? So that is ultimately how your body uses fuels as a fuel to perform an exercise. But now we have to look at, as we said, the outcome of tonight was to give you exposure to nutrient timing for exercise prescription and specifically fat loss. So once again, we'll go and look at, if we're trying to burn fat as a fuel source, when should we eat, what should we eat, and why? So we're going to look at pre-aerobic exercise. So before you undertake any huffy-puffy, we'll use a time slot of you're coming in to train at 9:30 in the morning. This is when you'll train. You want to make sure that your blood sugars should be at equilibrium, meaning that's where your sugar should be, nice and stable. So when you're training, you want, ultimately, when you come in, your blood sugars to be nice and happy, no ups and downs. You don't want peaks, troughs, you don't want anything like that. How does that happen? How do these peaks and troughs happen? It's when you eat. So if we eat before we train, the fuel that we will burn in our exercise outcomes will be the fuel that we've eaten. So predominantly, most people before they train say, I need energy. I can't train without energy. So they'll have some carbohydrate-based food. So it could be a cereal, could be banana, could be a fruit juice, something that just makes them feel energized, fueled. Unfortunately, with those fuel sources, they allow this to happen, peak. So once this big peak takes place, well then that hormone, unfortunately, that we dread so heavily in fat loss becomes prevalent. Insulin has to counteract that effect and has to bring our blood sugars back down to a steady state. So the whole time you are undertaking exercise, once you have eaten, you are in no position at all to fat burn. You physically can't use fat as a fuel source. Even if you have a whey protein shake on water previous to exercise, you can't burn fat as a fuel source at the fat cell because of the elevation in our blood sugar levels.
It's putting the right food in at the right time, right to exercise.
That's right. So if we're coming into exercise again at this 9:30 mark, you'd want to be looking well forward, minimum 90 minutes before you could eat something, but more like, the 120 plus time. So, 2 hours plus before you've exercised would be the perfect scenario if you need to eat before you train. And the fuel that you would be consuming there is what we call a very high fibre, low glycemic index food.
See, I had stopped. I used to eat something before, but I must admit it was cereals.
Yes.
But the thing is, then I stopped eating it for a while. I had not been eating until I got this. And so really that's bad, really, to not eat prior to exercising. You've got to put the fuel in.
No. Now remember, what's our fuel? You want to be using this as a fuel. So you don't need to be eating before you exercise for fat loss. Okay, so fat loss. I'm not even going to go into weight gain. It's a different kettle of fish altogether. But if you want fat loss, you want to be using fat as a fuel, correct? Okay, so if you are eating before you train, you're not allowing yourself to get to the fat cell. Because the body's not even going to have to use any energy to get into the cell to pull glucose out. It's there in abundance. In the bloodstream, floating around going, here I am, party time, come and use me.
So that was okay that I had stopped eating prior to coming.
Goodness gracious, it's for fat loss.
I had a cup of coffee when I first got home.
How did you have your coffee?
It's easy.
No, but how did you have your coffee? Did you have it with sugar? Did you have it with milk?
No, it's coffee with low-fat milk. It's
Okay.
light, dairy light.
Mhm.
And no, I don't have sugar.
Okay, good. And what time was that before you trained?
Well, that could have been anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. But you see, I've been doing this.
Yeah.
I'm now on the fat burning thing, so I'm trying to do this one here.
Yeah.
And so I've been eating. So that's wrong.
Yeah, again, it's stipified in there, you don't eat before you train and all that sort of stuff. The guidelines are there for a
So
reason.
when did you use this then for fat burning?
Every day of the week.
Oh, so really once I've done my exercise, I can go back and start doing this system here.
Well, that system's a lifestyle. That should be what if anyone's looking for fat loss, they're the food, that's the pattern you follow. So you come in and train, you do your training, and then once you leave, you supply yourself with a protein so you can build and aid in repair. Make sure you eat good quality, unrefined foods. So, so all your salads and steamed vegetables in abundance.
So although I'm doing this, don't eat the first meal prior to coming here.
Again, you can. Remember, it's about the timing of.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to.
So if you're eating at 7:30 in the morning and you're training, well, that's fine.
Yeah, because I had a word with Tony this morning. I said, when I first put my food into my mouth, it was just tuna. And it was about 7, so about 7:45 was when I finished. So I was asking her this morning, should you take it from the first time you put the first food in your mouth or when you finish? Or am I nitpicking for it?
Yeah, you're probably nitpicking there, it depends. If it takes you an hour to eat a can of tuna, well,
Well, I was running around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, I got to eat this, I got to eat this this morning, and I had 4 strawberries. And I thought, I got to eat this.
So yeah, okay. The reality is
Because
that
I wanted to get it in before, and allow that time before
Yeah.
training.
This is where you are getting fascinated with the structure. So it's not meant to be complicated and complex like that. It's what you're going to do day in, day out, meal in, meal out, week in, week out. It's a system that you put, yeah. So you just continue to do what you're doing, just make sure that you're not eating any,
As long as it's 120 minutes, so.
yeah, before. So the food can be broken down, metabolized, transported, stored, and then their blood sugars are back to
So
normal.
if I know that I've got up late and I want to come
Yeah.
here, don't eat anything, and then go back into that system of trying to eat, is it 30 minutes or an hour?
Yeah, up within the hour after you've trained.
So if I think, gee, I want to come to the gym,
Yeah.
but I don't want to wait those 2 hours because I get concerned tank,
Yeah.
don't eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Come and then go back to that system. All right.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad. Good. So once again, this is this nutrient timing. If you're coming to do aerobic activity, waiting a minimum of 90 minutes to 120 minutes after you've consumed a food source. For that reason, the body can break it down, get the nutrients it requires, transport it to the cells it's needed, and have your blood sugars return to a normal state. Then you can undertake the exercise with the full capabilities of tapping into fat as a fuel. So you're using glucose and you're using fats as a fuel, as we stated so correctly, with aerobic activity, with weight training.
Is there any length of time which is the dangers of doing, say, a cane, and I haven't eaten anything? The cane did something like when in the summer, I try and go swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Can there be too long a period without food to
So, I suppose once again, Nancy, you get to the state you're asking a question that is relevant to an individual, so once again, when you come to exercise, the key indicator of your outputs are your performance outcomes. So, if you come to the gym to train and normally you can swim 5 laps of the pool, and then because of the way you're consuming food, you can swim 3 strokes and you feel like you're going to die, well, then you know that ultimately what you're doing is just crazy. You've got to be able to undertake your normal physical outcomes. Once that's hindered, you're not eating anywhere near correctly, your body's malnourished, and it's not going to perform at all. So that would be an insane eating strategy. With resistance training, once again, for fat loss, you'd still wait that 90 to sort of 120 minutes, consume a really good fuel source. So once again, an example, brown rice and some scrambled eggs with a bit of steamed vegetables through it. That would be really good. Maybe 1/2 cup brown rice, 1 whole egg, and maybe 30 grams of veggies, and whack that in a bowl and munch on that about 2 hours before you go to the panel beater. Then you come and panel beat. Once you've panel beaten, this is the thing now, we need to replenish, because we've done, here's our muscle cell. Once we've been bashing it in the gym, well, the muscle cell becomes damaged. So it's very important then that the nastiness that we've undertaken, we've hurt this little brother, we've got to make sure we can fix him. So it's the foods that we consume post-training that enable this cell to go from that full circle to a happy cell once again. So we're going to supply the building blocks, the amino acids, proteins, once again, to enable cellular repair. But in saying that, we also need to replenish some of our glucose, aka carbohydrate stores. Why is that important? Well, once again, we talked about the fuel tank, full, empty, where? In the liver and in the muscle cell. That's where we store carbohydrates. We've depleted that, so realistically the muscle cell and the liver cells and hepatocytes are depleted. So now we are in a state of where a horrible hormone called cortisol is floating around in abundance. And this bugger just attacks the cell, attacks the cell, attacks the cell, keeps breaking it down. So we can get at alanine, that amino acid, to make glucose. So we can prevent muscle tissue breakdown via cortisol if we are wise enough to consume a little bit of glucose and our proteins post-training within a 60-minute window. So when we say within, you would not wait any longer than 60 minutes. No longer at all than 60 minutes to consume a very balanced, nutritionally balanced, carbohydrate, protein-based meal. Because that's going to hinder ineffective cortisol. Cortisol it starts with C, so we'll say cortisol is catastrophic, it's catabolic, it breaks things down. We don't want the cell to be broken down any more than we have undertaken already. We have chosen to undertake exercise that breaks the cell. That is a stress. Now, unfortunately, we've supplied another stress that's going to make that even further detrimental. The purpose of exercise is to undertake cellular trauma, get the cell damaged. The purpose of nutrition is to remold, rebuild, and aid in growth. That's what nutrition is for. So that is the process, purely and simply, of how all exercise should be undertaken for fat loss. The parameters of 1, the fuels that we use to undertake aerobic activity, the fuels we use to undertake resistance-based training activity, the time frames we should be undertaking to obtain fat loss. Plain and simple. It doesn't get any simpler than that, and it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. Of course, it can be, and it gets that way, because you start debating philosophies and individual philosophies. But philosophies are only as good as the chemistry. And once you understand how all these chemical processes work and how these hormonal interventions work, well then you can say, no, that won't work because of this. It doesn't have to get any harder than that. Rob, does that make sense? I think you're following...
It does, and the point is, when you hear listening to you talk about it, wow, that's it. But then you go away to put it into practice, and it doesn't seem to come together.
I understand completely, and this is where we say about theory. You know, this is the theory of it, and this is where I come back to Mark Delforce, you know, this gentleman. He will stick to that to the T, absolute to the T. And that's why you get fantastic outcomes. But life gets in the road. You know, quite plain and simple. I have every intention to, you know, ascertain a physical outcome that's different to where I'm at the moment. And unless I put everything into place, it's not going to happen. As simple as that. I can eat effectively, but I'm not going to build the muscle tissue that I want to. Everything I've just explained here in regards to fat loss, not eating, you know, again, what I'm doing is completely turn that upside down. I'm guzzling sugar down as I'm training, before I'm training, and as soon as I'm finished training. That's the only window that would change. That 90 to 120 minutes before someone wants fat loss, we're not eating. For someone who is gaining weight, wants to, they are eating. And they eat the whole way through their training. They're sucking on sugars and proteins while they're training. And the moment they do their last, it's like bang. It's that simple, because again, the whole purpose of what they're trying to do is suppress this. But so are you, after you've trained. The beauty is that we know cortisol will take about 45 minutes after exercise before it becomes secreted. So this is why I say no longer than 60 minutes, you know. That 30, 45 minute window is about the optimal time for someone who's looking for fat loss. The reason being, with fat loss, you've turned up the vortex with exercise. So you're using fat as a fuel. But as soon as I put anything in there, after I've trained, bang, fat burning stops. Because, once again, insulin will be secreted because of the fuel. If we use protein, it's got leucine, the amino acid in it. wham, stimulates blood glucose elevation. Nowhere near as severe as glucose will, but it does have a negative outcome in regards to fat loss. There's no doubt. Glucose also, with carbohydrate fuels, is going to force blood elevation. Carbohydrates, therefore, calling on the effect of insulin to be the predominant hormone, the storage hormone, and fat burning stops. So we're trying to take advantage of the window that you've undertaken exercise, half an hour, an hour and a half, whatever you spend in, plus a half hour, 45-minute window after that, where you're in something called deficit, where your body's trying to replenish all the, what we call adenosine triphosphate, cellular energy that it's had to borrow at the start. It's like a mortgage, you're paying back all this energy to the body, and in doing so, you're using fats as a fuel. So we're trying to use the blender effect, so you become a more efficient fat burner for a longer period of time.
The only thing that I have to get my head around is the sugar levels. Okay. You say getting sugar levels normal. Now, your normal is 10 to 9.
Yes.
Right. Now,
So, correct.
I'll go to bed at night, my sugar will be 6.5.
Yes.
I'll starve all night, I'll get up in the morning, it'll be 7.4.
Yes.
Now, which is normal?
Normal.
I'll come to the gym at 7.5.
Yeah.
I'll go home, I'll have a bit of breakfast, and an hour and a half later it'll be 6.5. Is that normal? Which is normal?
Yes.
On the right line. That's
Good question. And when I say normal, Rob, I mean at a level where insulin isn't being secreted because of an influx or a natural, so we call it, it's not trickling in the glucose into the bloodstream, it's a big flooding in of glucose. So your blood sugars at normal could be anywhere between 6 and 7.5. Insulin won't be secreted at that. It won't be. So therefore, your normal is, as you said, different to mine. But your normal is your normal. So that would mean that your body has a set parameter, its homeostatic level, where it can work within a specific gauge and not have insulin secreted to compensate that. When we're talking eating food, your blood sugar levels don't elevate by 1 or 2, they elevate by 6 and 4, 5, 6. That's when insulin becomes...
So basically, if I don't eat, that's my blood sugar on the level. As soon as I eat, it goes up.
Yes, and then that flooding in of nutrient is enough to cause insulin to be released from the pancreas.
But also, if you don't eat carbohydrates at a certain period of time, my blood sugar goes up.
Yeah, and that's through the other hormone. Remember, we've talked about glucagon.
That's right.
Yes. So the
point is, I get up in the morning, come to the gym, start having workouts,
Yes.
not eating, yet my blood sugar could go up because I'm short of carbohydrate and glucose comes in. So my blood sugar's gone up, which then kicks me insulin.
Yes.
So I'm back to square one.
Yeah, but this is when you're exercising and glucose is being secreted. It's being secreted so it can be pulled into the muscle cells and contract. Difference. So your body's going, I need glucose in the muscle cell now so I can contract. So insulin is there working for you at the muscle cell. Remember we talked about those things the other week called glut transporters. And remember we said GLUT4 is on the muscle cell and the fat cell. So you can still have insulin. Remember you can still have insulin in your bloodstream, inhibiting fat burning, but not inhibiting muscle contraction. Because the transporter will be on the cell membrane of the muscle cell and saying, insulin, you can come in and pull the glucose into the muscle cell so I can contract. But there's no insulin down at the fat cell because it's not being inhibited. It's got nothing to do with fat building there because all the glucose you've got isn't going to the fat cell because you don't need it. It's going to the muscle cell where it is needed.
Right, so it's being used, it's coming in
and the body's going, okay, well, if you were to sit on your ass, eating fairy floss, well, it's a different thing. The muscle cells are going, hey, I need you because it's so heavy to do this with the fairy floss. It doesn't need that. But the fat cells going, hey, I need you down here because I'm more than happy to accept it. But when you're in there doing that, yes, so correctly, your blood, it's pulling it into the cell. And using it. Yes. So I think this is where we've had this problem before, because I knew once when I mentioned about when insulin is about, insulin will be about all the time and it can inhibit fat loss, but it can be used at another time for muscle cell. And I saw both Marion in your face and, what? when he said insulin's about, we don't fat burn. So yes, but as I've said, every week these things become more and more in depth because the education that we're conveying, you know, especially people like us who've come to a lot of them, you're at a level now where you understand all of this stuff. So I've just got to make sure when someone else is doing, I try and go back to the start and then, cut and paste the important bits, but then we can get into the heavy stuff. Because you're at that level now where you go, okay, well, I understand the basic principles of how all this stuff works. But then there's always going to be a question that will lead to another, and another, and another, and another, and fantastic stuff.
I think one of the other problems as well is knowledge of choosing food. That is a big problem, and I don't think it's just for me.
No, not at all.
It's a bit. We're talking about the fructose.
Mm.
You don't realise what it's in.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It is.
Horrible.
Tomato ketchup.
Yeah, fructose.
I think, well, okay, it's 24 grams per 100.
Yeah.
But that's 100, but you only have.
Maybe 5 to 10 grams.
So what?
2.4, 1.1, 1.2.
That's over your 5.
Yeah.
Which is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Below 5. So just have a squirt of that. Is that detrimental?
And that, not at that, and because we're looking
But
at.
that's what I say. It's over. You say 5.
Yes.
Below 5.
Yeah, yeah.
This is 24.
Yeah.
Well, so the quantity has a bearing
On. So serving size up. That's where those shopping centre tours become really worth their weight in gold, because the more of those that are undertaken and run, those sort of things you can get into and say, okay, well, like you said, if it's a 5 gram serve, yes, the rules of thumb, if it's more than 5 grams of sucrose, sugar, per 100 gram serve, well, then you'd think again, there'd be a better option out there possibly. But again, as you said, as a condiment, if there's only 5 grams or less per serve, so the sugar content is at 2.5 grams, when we said 1.25 would be fructose, well then how detrimental is 1 gram of fructose, you know? Well, it's 1.2 grams of fat that we're going to produce, but again, you know, sitting on your bum while you're eating the meal, you've burnt that fat off because of the respiratory quotient it's called. So, yeah, that's where we can get fanatical, you know? Yeah. And then, you know, again, more about, it's very much more about removing, remember we talked about palates, the best indicator. If it's super sweet, you know, if you had honey Dijonnaise mustard, well that is super sweet. It even tells you it's full of fructose in the word honey. Well then, you know, we could splash a little bit more on and stuff like that on our chicken breast or what have you, and then all of a sudden you haven't had 1.25 grams of fructose, you've had 12.5 grams of fructose, because it's easy to do. And then you start to question, well, if I do that 2 or 3 times a week, there's, 50 grams of fat I've added and so on and so forth. That's when you can start to question it.
You look at these marinades, packets of
Oh,
marinades. But then you go to make your own with the ingredients, and it's still, tomato paste.
yeah, but
Which goes in a lot of them.
yeah, it's in a lot of it.
That's hard, it's not sugary. So even making your own marinade doesn't necessarily counteract that sugar.
No. It's because it's in everything, mate. You know, that's why it is the bland of the food, the better it is for us, but then the better it is for us as an organism, but not as great for the psychology, and keeping the taste buds happy. So that's where we quantify selection, like how many times a week, can we allow something that we, I suppose, question as being a lesser food choice and still get away with it. As we said, 2 to 3 times a week, 2 to 3 meals, let yourself have some of that stuff. But as long as you are committed to a fat loss goal, I'd be hoping that that individual is driven by their goal and can see the reasoning behind trying to eliminate some of those sugars and look further into, herbs and spice, but only you, as Robert Barnett, can make that decision, ultimately, and that is why, once again, I say fat loss is bloody hard work for that reason. You can see how hard it can be. But I believe that it has to be conveyed to the layman like that. If it isn't, we're kidding them. And, if they're aware of the battle they're going into and they can undertake that this is going to be hard, but geez, the prize at the end is just so fruitful. You know, it's an amazing thing, especially if you're a family man or a family woman. You know, and you can convey a lifestyle to your offspring that they're going to see. Well, what you do is what you do, and obviously you're the greatest mentors for your children. They see what you do and they replicate what you do. You know, they don't go and eat butter white toast covered in cream cheese this thick every night and have it for dinner without someone seeing that happen. You know, and then replicating that. There's obviously greater choices that can be made, but nutrition, as I said, we've got to remember the true science of nutrition is about using the nutrient in food and plant to obtain the remodeling, rebuilding, repair and growth of us. That's what it's for. And correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only thing that keeps us alive. The foods that we eat. So why would it not be the most important thing that you could ever contemplate doing? Yet it isn't. It's always a second thought. Except for a very minute, tiny percent of individuals who understand and use food as their fuels for life. And I don't suggest that everyone should be an elitist athlete, because again, that's a fatism as well. You know, it's an extremist adventure. So we're talking about the real individual. You know, like this is you people. You know, if you can use some of this stuff, wow, great.
So they're always saying that man seems to be more careful of what they put into their car when they're running than they do in their own body.
Oh, I could say that I have to agree very similarly with stuff like that, because
Really fastidious somehow.
yeah, very much so.
And not just, I say man, but humans, I think, yeah.
Definitely.
Sometimes I
As we said, food, fuel is just something that we do for the sake of we do. You know, we'll feel hungry, our central nervous system will govern a message to the stomach to secrete a hormone that will tell the brain that you're hungry for sugar. The body will consume the sugar, and then that increases our blood sugar level, then insulin is secreted and we get fatter. That's ultimately how the Western world functions. And we are getting larger and larger and